The moment I stepped through the front door, I knew something was wrong. The house was quiet, too quiet. I had come home earlier than usual, the keys still warm from my pocket, my shoes soaked from the rain outside. But instead of the familiar sounds of Gavin watching TV or Chloe rustling in the kitchen, there was only the low murmur of voices, faint clipped, coming from Gavin's home office. I stood frozen in the hallway, holding my breath as the words drifted toward me. "She can't know anything yet," Chloe said, her voice hushed but urgent. "We have to act fast, before she figures it out." A chair scraped. Then Gavin replied, "Don't worry. I've already talked to Prescott. He said we just need her signature. Then we'll move forward. She'll think it's about taxes or something." My heart slammed against my ribs. Prescott. That name meant nothing to me. Yet, somehow, it carried the weight of betrayal. I pressed my back to the wall, careful not to make a sound. They had no idea I was home, and they were talking about me, about my inheritance, about a plan. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. I just stood there in the dim light of the hallway, listening to my own daughter and husband conspire like strangers, like thieves. I had been married to Gavin Hale for 23 years. We'd built a life together, raised a daughter, buried 2 dogs, and weathered job losses and late mortgage payments. I thought I knew the man. I thought I knew Chloe, too, smart, driven, compassionate. But standing there, I felt the ground give way beneath me. My name is Miriam Hale, and until that moment, I believed I had a solid, if unremarkable, family. A few days ago, I had been sitting across from the attorney of my late Aunt Edith, stunned to learn she had left me everything. Not just a generous sum of money, but also her antique business in downtown Savannah and stakes in multiple properties throughout the city. Aunt Edith had been eccentric, wealthy, and mostly absent from our lives. I assumed she would leave it all to charity, or to someone else in the family I barely remembered. But no, she left it to me. Gavin had reacted with enthusiasm, almost too quickly. He'd pulled me into a hug right there in the attorney's office, talking about renovations, reinvestments, and Chloe's tuition. Chloe had been equally thrilled, even mentioning the possibility of studying abroad. But now I knew. Their smiles were rehearsed. Their excitement was a cover. I backed away from the hallway, quietly shut the front door behind me, then opened it again, loudly this time, and slammed it shut. "I'm home," I called out. I heard the office door click. Gavin emerged seconds later, smiling as if nothing had happened. Chloe peeked out, waving casually. "Hey, Mom." "Studying for finals," she said. I smiled back. My voice didn't shake. My face didn't betray a thing. But inside, everything was falling apart. That night, I lay in bed beside the man I had loved for more than 2 decades, listening to his soft breathing in the dark, wondering, how long had this betrayal been waiting for me in the shadows? I didn't sleep that night, not even for a second. I stared at the ceiling while Gavin snored gently beside me, his arm resting across his chest like a man with nothing to hide. 23 years. That was how long I had given him. My loyalty, my faith, my time. I'd stood beside him when his architecture firm lost half its clients during the recession. I'd taken extra shifts at the hospital to make sure Chloe's college fund didn't dry up. I cooked, cleaned, and covered for his late nights and longer silences. But now I had to ask myself, had I been blind or just willfully naive? By morning, I had already replayed their conversation in my head 100 times. Chloe's voice, nervous but determined. She can't know anything yet. Gavin's tone, calculated, careful. Prescott just needs her signature. The words echoed like gunshots in my mind, and I knew what I had to do. I got up quietly, careful not to wake him, and walked into the kitchen. I poured myself a cup of coffee in silence. It was muscle memory, really. Same blue mug with the chipped handle Gavin always used. I stared at it and suddenly hated how familiar it felt. I spent the morning digging through our financial documents. On the surface, everything looked fine, but I knew better now. I logged into our joint account and scrolled through the transactions, That's when I saw it. Large withdrawals over the past few months. 5,000 here, 10,000 there. None of it discussed with me. None of it explained. Gavin had always handled the complicated stuff. I trusted him. Stupidly, I printed the records and slipped them into a folder I labeled with one word, truth. Next, I searched his home office while he was in the shower. My hands shook as I opened his bottom drawer. Inside, beneath old sketches and contractor receipts, I found a velvet pouch. Inside the pouch were pawn receipts for my jewelry. Not just any pieces, my anniversary necklace, the sapphire earrings Chloe helped pick out for my 40th birthday. All gone. Sold off. For what? I didn't find any answers, only more questions. A crumpled piece of paper with a name and phone number, Robert Prescott. No title, no explanation, just the name, scrawled in Gavin's handwriting. There was also a half-torn sticky note with a name I didn't recognize. Zach Prescott. Later that afternoon, I checked Chloe's room. She was at class, or at least that's what she told me. Her room looked ordinary at first, until I found the dress. It was tucked in the back of her closet, still in the boutique garment bag, tags attached. A designer piece, easily over $2,000. We couldn't afford that, not with Gavin's business struggling and Chloe on scholarship. My daughter didn't shop like that, unless someone else was paying. By the time dinner rolled around, I had managed to paste on a calm smile. Gavin was unusually cheerful. He poured wine, told me he'd made reservations for a weekend getaway at a vineyard just for the two of us. Chloe chattered about her econ exam, eyes flickering away whenever I looked too closely. But I noticed something, the glances between them. Quick, loaded, as if I was the outsider in my own home. I went to bed that night with a plan. Not of revenge, not yet, but of clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when the illusion finally shatters. If Gavin thought he married a woman too kind to question, he was about to remember exactly who I was before I became Mrs. Hale. 2 days later, Gavin told me he had an early site meeting and rushed out of the house before sunrise. I waited precisely 20 minutes, then grabbed my coat, my keys, and the folder I'd been building. My private archive of quiet betrayal. I didn't tell Chloe where I was going. Honestly, I didn't even know where I was headed until my gut made the choice for me. I hailed a rideshare and followed Gavin. It wasn't hard. He never checked his mirrors. Never suspected I'd be the one tailing him. He didn't drive to his construction site. He drove downtown, parked 3 blocks away from a cafe I hadn't been to in years, and walked inside like a man with something to hide. I waited across the street, inside another coffee shop, pretending to scroll through my phone while my eyes never left the window. 20 minutes passed before a man joined Gavin at his table. Older, mid-50s maybe, expensive gray overcoat, perfectly knotted silk tie, clean-shaven with eyes that didn't blink enough. He moved like someone who wasn't used to being told no. That had to be Prescott. Their conversation was muted, but I could read enough from their body language. Gavin handed him a thick envelope. Prescott opened it briefly, glanced inside, then tucked it into his coat without blinking. They shook hands, exchanged a few more words, and then the man got up and walked out without looking back. Gavin lingered, sipping his coffee as if nothing had just happened. I followed the man. I know how that sounds, crazy, reckless, but something told me I needed to know who he was. He walked 3 blocks, turned a corner, and entered an office building with gold-lettered signage that read, Prescott and Fielding, Estate Law and Civil Disputes. I wrote the name down in my notes app, circled it twice. My instincts had been right. Gavin was working with a lawyer behind my back. I went home before him. Chloe was already there, supposedly studying, though her laptop screen turned black the moment I stepped into her room. Just taking a break, she said quickly, closing it altogether. She looked pale, eyes rimmed with redness like she'd been crying. Everything okay? I asked, keeping my voice even. She nodded too fast. Just tired. Exams. I didn't push. I just smiled, told her to get some rest. but my mind was spinning. That night, when Gavin finally returned, I watched him pretend. He kissed my cheek, asked about dinner, talked about some zoning conflict that he claimed had eaten up his day. I nodded, laughed in the right places, pretended I didn't notice the faint scent of cigar smoke in his jacket, the kind they don't allow on construction sites. When he fell asleep, I took his phone. I didn't need his password. He used the same one for everything. His messages were mostly boring until I found one. A thread labeled RP. My stomach dropped. The last message was from earlier that afternoon. We'll proceed as discussed. Once the signatures are in, we push to challenge the will. She won't see it coming. Attached was a PDF file named Hail_trust_override_free.pdf. She won't see it coming. But I did. And I wasn't going to let them rewrite my future behind closed doors. Not while I was still standing in the house I built. Not while I still had a name. Not while my daughter was being weaponized against me by the man I once promised to love forever. I didn't sleep that night either. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table in the dark, rereading the message Gavin had sent to Robert Prescott. I didn't open the PDF. It felt like touching something contaminated. Just seeing the file name made my skin crawl. Override. That word alone told me everything. They weren't just planning to challenge Aunt Edith's will. They were planning to erase me from it, piece by piece, legally, permanently. I waited until Gavin left the next morning, then checked our shared desktop computer in the den. He rarely used it, but I had a hunch. I clicked through his browser history. Hidden among architecture blogs and sports betting sites was a chain of visits to law forums, topics like contesting mental capacity in estate disputes and undue influence in elder wills. He wasn't being subtle. He didn't think he needed to be. Then I noticed a bookmarked folder, Chloe Resources. Inside were downloads, financial aid guides, study abroad applications, and, oddly, a contact sheet for an elite university in Switzerland. Chloe had never mentioned Switzerland, but Gavin had. I remembered now. 2 nights ago at dinner, he'd casually mentioned international programs for her, said it might be the right time to spread her wings. Suddenly, a name surfaced again in my mind. Zach Prescott. I'd seen it scribbled on Gavin's note days ago. Prescott wasn't just Gavin's lawyer. He was orchestrating more than legal documents. I needed to know who Zach was. I started with Chloe's room. Again. This time I looked harder. Beneath a pile of notebooks on her desk, I found a receipt for a brunch date, 2 entrees, champagne, $120 total, signed and paid with a card I didn't recognize. The signature, ZP. I checked her phone while she showered. I didn't feel guilty. I had raised her. I had given her everything. And now I had to protect her from something she didn't yet understand. In her contacts were 2 numbers not linked to any names, just initials, ZP and RP. One message from ZP read, Dad says everything's moving fast. Just keep her calm. You're doing great. Chloe had responded. She's starting to ask questions. I stared at the screen, numb. Zach was Robert Prescott's son, and Chloe, my Chloe, was dating him, or more accurately, had been introduced to him. Placed in front of him. A setup. This wasn't just betrayal. This was strategy. I found her journal next. I hadn't read her private words in years, not since she was 13 and drawing hearts around band names. But I opened it anyway. She had written about Zach. He's kind. He listens. He makes me feel seen. Then just a few pages later, Dad wants me to sign something. Says it's just paperwork. But I don't understand why it makes my stomach hurt. And another entry, Zach says it's for Mom's protection. That lawyers just need a witness in case something goes wrong with the will. But I don't know. Something feels wrong. Mom looks smaller lately. I hate this. I closed the journal with shaking hands. They had her, not just legally, emotionally. Zach had manipulated her into believing this was for my own good. Gavin had used her as a tool, his own daughter. The girl I carried through fevers and math homework was now signing her name to lies, and she didn't even know it. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was a war for my family's soul, and they had no idea I had just begun to fight. I had just begun to process the betrayal unfolding under my roof when the past came clawing its way back. It started with a folder buried deep in Gavin's locked file cabinet, the one I'd always respected as his space. Not anymore. I'd found the spare key taped under the bottom of his desk drawer, and with trembling fingers, I unlocked the truth. Inside were photocopies of old financial records, contracts, and what looked like scanned letters, most of them stamped with dates from over 15 years ago. I recognized some of the names. My father's company, Hale Timberworks, the business he built from scratch before it went bankrupt in what I thought was a tragic fluke. But as I read, the pieces fell together in ways that turned my stomach. Two names kept appearing, over and over: Gavin Hale, Vanessa Porter, my half-sister. Vanessa, and I hadn't spoken in years, not since the funeral, when grief had curdled into accusation. She'd blamed me for being our father's favorite. I'd blamed her for not even showing up until the casket was being lowered. We'd shouted, we'd broken things, and we'd never spoken again. But here, in black and white, was proof they'd never really stopped speaking. In fact, they'd been more than just in contact. They'd been partners. They'd forged my father's signature on contracts that liquidated company assets. They'd opened offshore accounts. They'd funneled the money into Gavin's business under different shell names. According to these documents, Vanessa had handled the legal loopholes. Gavin had used the cash to launch his firm. My father, who thought Gavin was a struggling young architect worthy of trust, had died believing his company collapsed from bad investments. He never knew it was sabotage. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the papers. I sank into Gavin's desk chair, while rising in my throat. I had married the man who helped destroy my father. And my own sister, the woman who once braided my hair and gave me my first book of poetry, had stood by and watched it happen. I dug deeper into the folder. There were photos, time-stamped digital prints. Gavin and Vanessa together over the years in cafes on what looked like business trips. Sometimes at events, I remember Gavin saying he had to attend alone. In one, they were laughing over wine in a hotel bar in Chicago. The date was exactly 1 year after our anniversary. I couldn't breathe. I stumbled out of the office and into the hallway, gripping the wall. Chloe passed by and asked if I was okay. I told her I had a headache. She nodded and disappeared into her room. I wondered, briefly, if Vanessa had ever told her anything. If Chloe knew she had an aunt who wasn't dead or missing, just complicit. That night, I didn't confront Gavin. Instead, I waited for him to fall asleep. Then I opened Aunt Edith's box again, the one her lawyer, Andrew Clark, had given me. Inside, under her last letter and property deeds, was a sealed envelope marked private. Read alone. I opened it with numb fingers. Inside was a letter from Aunt Edith and a flash drive. The letter was short. Miriam, I know this won't be easy, but you deserve to know everything. Your father's death, your sister's silence, Gavin's ambition. It was never a coincidence. I hired someone years ago to investigate. I kept what I found sealed until I was sure you could handle it. But now it's your time. Don't let them erase you. Fight like I would have, but smarter. I clicked the flash drive into my laptop and watched a decade of betrayal unfold in crystal clear audio and video. Gavin, Vanessa, Robert Prescott, and Zach. They weren't just conspiring now. They had always been conspiring, and I had just opened the door to the storm they thought would never reach them. By morning, I was no longer the woman they remembered. Something inside me had shifted, snapped, maybe, but in the quietest way. No screams, no sobbing, just a kind of stillness that comes when you realize the house you thought you built was never yours. I sat at the kitchen table again, this time with Aunt Edith's flash drive still plugged in, a notepad beside me filled with names, dates, connections. Patterns emerged like spiderwebs, intricate and designed to trap. The videos on the drive were damning. Recorded meetings between Gavin and Robert Prescott in a downtown hotel room. Vanessa appearing in the background, laughing softly with Zach. Discussions of timing, leverage. If Miriam doesn't cooperate, will file to question her mental capacity. At one point, Gavin leaned forward on the screen, his voice low but clear. Once Chloe signs, we can move. She won't know what she's agreeing to. She just wants out of the stress. And Prescott nodded, like a man who's done this 100 times. We'll use the dementia angle if needed. Edith was eccentric. That's all the court needs. But Edith wasn't eccentric. She was strategic. I made an appointment that afternoon with her attorney, Andrew Clark. I told Gavin I was visiting the antique shop to begin organizing the books. He didn't question it. He was too busy pretending nothing was wrong. Andrew greeted me in his small, wood-paneled office with a knowing expression. I wonder how long it would take, he said, closing the door behind me. I didn't even have to ask. He opened his safe and took out a thick folder. Your aunt anticipated resistance, he said carefully. Inside the folder were notarized psychiatric evaluations dated 6 months before her death. Full mental clarity, witness affidavits, even a video of her signing the will, speaking clearly about her intentions. No manipulation, no confusion. She wanted to make sure no one could touch what she left you, Andrew said, sliding the papers across the desk. She knew your family wouldn't take this lying down. I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of it settle. There's more, I whispered. Gavin, he's not just challenging the will. He's working with Prescott. They're manipulating Chloe. Andrew's face darkened. Prescott is a vulture. He's been sued before for predatory tactics in probate. If he's involved, this isn't just about the will. It's about removing you entirely. I nodded, then added quietly, and Vanessa's involved. Andrew paused, his jaw tightening. Your sister. She's not just involved, I said. She's been part of this since my father died. There's evidence. He didn't speak for a while. Then he handed me a smaller envelope. Your aunt left this for Vanessa, too, but only to be delivered after the reading of the will. I didn't open it. I stared at it, because in that moment, I understood something I hadn't before. Edith didn't just leave me her wealth. She left me her war, the final battle she never lived to fight. She knew who they were, all of them. She just needed me to be ready. And I was, because now I had truth. Now I had evidence. And now I had nothing left to lose. The lies didn't stop at whispers behind closed doors. They had signatures now, on paper in ink, forged through guilt and manipulation. I found out the truth that same evening, just after I returned from Andrew's office. Chloe was home, curled up on the couch with a textbook in her lap, but her eyes were distant. Her phone buzzed twice, and she silenced it without looking. I didn't say anything at first, just watched her, memorizing her face, the way her fingers trembled slightly when she turned a page she clearly wasn't reading. Then my phone rang. It was Andrew. I have something you need to hear, he said, his voice tight. We checked with the notary office Prescott used. Chloe signed a document 2 days ago, a power of attorney. It gives Vanessa full rights to act on her behalf in legal proceedings. My throat closed. What else? A written statement. Sworn. Chloe claimed that Edith was showing signs of cognitive decline in the final year of her life. It's the exact foundation they need to challenge the will. And Chloe's signature is at the bottom. I didn't speak. Couldn't. The world was spinning too fast. She's been used, Miriam, Andrew added gently. We can reverse this, but we need her on record recanting those statements. I hung up and stood there in the foyer, staring at my daughter across the room. She looked up slowly. I must have looked pale, because she sat up straighter. Mom, are you okay? I walked over, sat beside her, and said as calmly as I could, Did you sign anything for Dad? Or for Vanessa? She stiffened, just slightly, but I saw it. I saw the panic, the way her fingers gripped the hem of her sweatshirt. They said it was just a form. For taxes. Something about Edith's estate. Her voice trailed off. I didn't accuse her. I didn't scream. I just said, I know what it was. She froze. Her mouth opened, then closed. And then, slowly, tears welled in her eyes. I didn't understand what I was doing. I thought I was helping. They said if we didn't move fast, you could get in trouble, that you might be sued, that the antique shop had shady business history, and it could all collapse on you. I let the silence hold. She broke first. Zach said his dad, Prescott, was just making things safe for us. For you. Dad said Aunt Edith had hidden debts. I didn't want you to get hurt. I didn't know it would mean taking everything away. I reached into the folder I had brought home and placed it gently in her lap. These are Aunt Edith's evaluations. Videos, letters, documents proving she was of sound mind. And these, I handed her a smaller stack, are from your father's drawer. Do you want to see what he pawned to fund this attack? Chloe's hands were trembling now. Her lips parted in a soft gasp as she looked down. He used you, sweetheart, I whispered. He used all of us. Chloe shook her head slowly. I need to fix this. Yes, I said. You do, but not alone. She nodded, wiping her face. What do we do? I took a deep breath. We take back control. Quietly, strategically, and this time they're the ones who won't see it coming. The message came just before midnight. A blocked number. One sentence. We need to talk. Alone. Tomorrow at noon. Hotel Verdant. Room 312. I didn't need a name. I knew who it was. Vanessa. I showed it to Andrew the next morning over coffee. He shook his head slowly, his jaw tight. It's risky. She's not reaching out to make peace, Miriam. She's cornered. That makes her desperate. Desperate people are dangerous. I won't be alone, I said. You'll be in the lobby. You'll have eyes on everything. He nodded reluctantly. If she brings anything, papers, drives, proof, we'll take it. If she tries to manipulate you again, she won't, I cut in. Not this time. I know what she is now. At 11:55, I walked into Hotel Verdant like I owned the place. Black slacks, gray blazer, notepad in my purse. Andrew sat in the lounge, pretending to read a magazine. I knocked once on room 312, waited. The door opened slowly. Vanessa stood there, a shadow of the sister I once knew. Her hair perfectly styled, but her eyes, they were wild. Panicked. Come in, she whispered. I stepped inside. She'd set the room like it was a business meeting. Coffee on the side table. Folder on the bed. Curtains half closed. She didn't waste time. Gavin's falling apart, she began. The deal with Prescott is unraveling. Your lawyer, Andrew, has started poking holes in the filings. Gavin didn't expect that. And now, with Chloe backing out, everything is collapsing. I didn't say a word. She paced barefoot on the rug. Krulev is breathing down Gavin's neck for repayment. If he doesn't come up with the money, things get violent. He's panicking, and I'm stuck in the middle. You put yourself there, I said coldly. She winced but didn't argue. I want out, she continued. I want to disappear before this explodes. And I have something you need. She reached into her leather tote and pulled out a thick file. Contracts, bank transfers, notarized letters. Photos of meetings between Gavin and Robert Prescott. Diagrams of their plan to use Chloe's signature to trigger an emergency reassessment of the will. It's all here, she said. How we planned it. The dates. The falsified documents. And she pulled out one last envelope. This, she said softer now, is what Gavin was really after. I opened it. Inside were photocopies of documents describing a secret asset, a private collection of rare art and antiques hidden in one of Edith's unlisted properties. A vault, untouched, insured for nearly $12 million. That was the true prize. That's why he married you, Vanessa whispered. He never loved you. He wanted into your family, into your father's company, into Edith's estate. I stared at her. Why are you telling me this now? Her smile was bitter, because Krulov has threatened to kill Gavin, and if he finds out I turned on him, he'll come for me too. Help me disappear. Give me just enough money to vanish. In return, you get everything. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stood, walked to the window, and stared out at the parking lot shimmering in the midday sun. Then I turned back and said, "You'll get your escape. But first, you're going to sign a sworn statement. Then, you'll give me every last document. And if you lie once, just once, we walk away and you're on your own." Vanessa didn't argue, because for the first time in her life, she wasn't the one holding the leverage. I was. We didn't wait. That same evening, Andrew filed a preliminary injunction to freeze all assets tied to Aunt Edith's estate. With Vanessa's signed statement, the folder of evidence, and Chloe's formal withdrawal of her previous testimony, we had enough to stall any further action from Gavin's side. But time was critical, because Gavin wasn't just reckless, he was drowning. And men who drown tend to drag others down with them. At 9:40 p.m., Andrew got a call from an old contact at the sheriff's office. "You'll want to hear this," the deputy had said. "Your client's husband, Gavin Hale, has a meeting scheduled tomorrow morning with a man we've been tracking for years. Leon Carlisle. Goes by Krulov in certain circles." I froze. Krulov, the name Vanessa had whispered with visible fear. A man with no business cards, no official records, just rumors of broken fingers and missing persons. Gavin was making a deal with the devil. The meeting was set to happen at a private estate just outside of Savannah, a sprawling plantation-style house listed under shell company tied to Robert Prescott's law firm. Of course, everything pointed back to him. Every lie, every forgery, every legal maneuver that wrapped itself in civility but was rooted in rot. Andrew didn't hesitate. "We loop in Major Sutter. He's been chasing Carlisle for years. If we get him, we get everyone." By midnight, I was in a safe location with Chloe and Andrew. The police had eyes on the estate. A plan was in motion. I couldn't sleep, but this time it wasn't fear, it was focus. I sat with Chloe, reviewing every timeline, every transaction, making sure our house of truth stood stronger than theirs of lies. At 6:43 a.m., the text came in from Major Sutter. Targets arrived. Surveillance holding. Waiting for go. By 9:15 it was over. Police stormed the estate just as Gavin handed over a document labeled Reassignment of Executor Rights. Inside, Carlisle, Prescott, and Gavin had been mid-discussion about liquidating estate assets through offshore accounts, using Vanessa's proxy paperwork as the final layer. They found forged signatures, a briefcase of unregistered cash, digital files linking Gavin and Carlisle in a chain of illegal asset movement stretching back 3 years. Prescott tried to invoke attorney-client privilege. It didn't work. Vanessa's signed testimony had already preempted that. When Andrew called to tell me they were all in custody, I didn't cry. I didn't even exhale. I just sat very still, holding Chloe's hand. "They're not out of play yet," I said. "Carlisle has people. Gavin has money stashed. Prescott has influence. But you have the truth," Chloe whispered. "And me." I nodded. "And we're not done yet." That evening, as we were preparing to return home, Vanessa called. She was frantic. "I heard what happened. Gavin's been arrested. Carlisle too. But someone's been in your house." My blood ran cold. She continued, her voice trembling. "They were looking for the vault. The collection. The real legacy." I hung up and called Andrew immediately. We arranged a police escort and drove to Aunt Edith's final unlisted property, a long-abandoned colonial house 2 hours out, the one Vanessa said might contain the vault. When we arrived, the front gate had been forced open. The basement door hung loose on one hinge, and inside, someone had torn the place apart. But they didn't find it, because they didn't know the final secret Aunt Edith had left for me. Not everything that's buried is meant to be found. Not by them. The cellar smelled like dust, old wood, and a trace of lavender, the kind Aunt Edith used to press into her handkerchiefs. The walls were bare brick, stained from decades of damp air. Shelves lined with forgotten paint cans and rusted garden tools. But in the far left corner, beneath a stack of antique crates, was what Vanessa had described, a warped patch of wall that didn't quite match the rest. Chloe stood beside me, flashlight trembling in her hands. Her face was pale, but her jaw was set. She hadn't hesitated once when I asked if she wanted to come. This was part of her story too, she'd said. I want to help set it right. Together, we moved the crates. Dust flew up in clouds, stinging our eyes. Behind them was a narrow wooden panel, sealed along the edges but with a small brass keyhole in the center. I pulled the final envelope Aunt Edith had left from my coat pocket, the one labeled, "Only when they try to take everything." Inside was a single key. I pressed it into the lock and turned. The panel opened with a groan. Inside was a narrow passage, just wide enough for a person to slip through sideways. Chloe went first, her flashlight sweeping ahead. The passage ended in a small, stone-lined vault, airless and silent, the kind of place that felt like it had held its breath for decades. And there it was, dozens of crates, perfectly stacked, each labeled in Edith's handwriting. Inside were paintings, oil canvases wrapped in linen, each marked with provenance tags I recognized from museum exhibitions. Artifacts, Civil War-era jewelry, rare books, a violin I knew had once belonged to a lost Austrian composer. A private collection that Edith had hidden for decades, known only to her and now to us. A typed note sat atop the tallest crate. For Miriam, if the time ever comes, you'll know what to do. They will try to own you. They will try to silence you. But they don't understand. The real legacy isn't the money. It's the clarity, the knowing, the power to choose who you become when the curtain falls. I stood in that silent vault, surrounded by the weight of generations, and let the truth settle into my bones. This wasn't just about an inheritance. It was about control, about stories rewritten and families poisoned from the inside, about my daughter being groomed to sign away our past and future for the sake of a man too cowardly to build anything of his own. We didn't take anything from that room. Not yet. We sealed it back, brick by brick, panel by panel. I would arrange for the contents to be protected, inventoried, placed in trust under my name. Far beyond Gavin's reach, beyond the courts, beyond any appeal his crooked lawyer could file. Outside, in the driveway, police lights flashed as officers finished sweeping the property. Vanessa had vanished again, probably halfway across the country by now. Gavin remained in custody. Prescott denied bail. Krulov was already on federal watch lists. But I knew this wasn't the end, because men like that don't disappear quietly, but neither do women like me. That night, back at home, I found Chloe sitting on the back porch with a cup of tea in her hands. She looked up at me with a new steadiness, her shoulders still young, still soft, but no longer naive. "I'm sorry," she said again. "I know," I replied, "and now you know who you are." She nodded slowly. "We're not victims, are we?" "No," I said, taking her hand. "We're the ones who lived through the fire and didn't burn." The stars were faint above us, the house quiet again. Ours now, fully finally. And though I didn't say it aloud, I knew this with everything in me. They came for a fortune, but left me something far more dangerous. They left me awake,